I never thought my life could vanish so quickly. One moment, I was Alexander Montgomery III, heir to everything my father had built. The golden boy everyone whispered about behind polite smiles. The next, I was a stranger in my own skin, standing in an apartment that smelled faintly of mildew, stacked with peeling paint and loneliness, so thick it could choke you. It started that night in the ballroom, the one where chandeliers spilled gold light across the polished floors. The air smelled of roses, perfume, and expensive cologne. People glided past, floating rather than walking, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I stood among them, smiling politely, nodding, offering a laugh when required, all the while feeling hollow. My father, the man whose name had been whispered in reverence for decades, raised his glass. He began one of his long speeches about legacy, power, and the empire we had built. I tried to feel pride, tried to share in the applause of those around me, but I felt nothing. A hollow echo reverberated inside me. Then came the men in black suits, federal agents. The music stopped mid-note. Conversations froze. My father's face, once so proud, turned marble cold as papers were handed over. Cameras flashed and accusations fell like stones. Fraud, embezzlement, corruption, a lifetime of lies laid bare. Everything fell. The mansion, the cars, the accounts, the prestige, all gone in a heartbeat. My mother disappeared into the countryside. My father was dragged behind bars, and I was left alone in a crumbling apartment in Havenford, too small for hope. I lay on the sagging mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling. The silence was oppressive. No servants, no meetings, no wealth, no noise. Just me, my thoughts, and a hollow emptiness that seemed determined to consume every part of me. It was then that I saw him, the boy outside the bakery. Hunger etched into every line of his small face. The baker stepped out, expecting resistance, but instead, he placed a warm loaf in the boy's hands. "No one should go hungry," he said. Simple words, simple act. Yet something inside me cracked open. I realized that the kind of wealth I have been chasing my whole life, the kind measured in money, status, and admiration, was hollow. True wealth, I thought, was this: kindness, justice, mercy, compassion. That night, I lay in the dark, city sounds muted outside my window. A whisper stirred in me, gentle, almost inaudible. This is not your ending. This is your beginning. I didn't understand it yet. I had no roadmap. I had only faith, barely ignited, flickering against the darkness. And yet the Holy Spirit was already there, steady, patient, guiding me to a purpose I could not yet see. The next days passed slowly, painfully. Silence pressed on me from all sides. I wandered the streets of Havenford, sometimes aimlessly, sometimes deliberately, observing. Children laughing, parents arguing, the desperate faces of the forgotten. Each sight and sound stripped away my numbness. I noticed a mother pulling her child close, a teenager being unfairly accused by a shopkeeper, an old man playing a harmonica for tips. Life was raw, messy, and painfully real. I ended up at the riverbank one evening, sitting on a bench that seemed older than pride itself. The water glinted with the last sun, moving stubbornly. I whispered, almost in shame, "Lord, what am I supposed to do now?" I expected silence. I braced myself for emptiness. But something shifted. A warmth settled in my chest, calm and intentional. You are not alone. No booming voice, no sudden miracles, just peace, deep and gentle. I was heard. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope flicker. I returned to the bakery to see the boy again. This time, danger lurked. Older children had cornered him near an alley. My chest tightened. I felt fear, yes, but also a strange protective instinct, a strength that wasn't mine alone. "Leave him alone," I shouted. Their laughter died, and the boy, Eli, looked up at me with wide eyes, trust trembling in his gaze. I walked him to safety, and the baker nodded silently. That night, I felt something shift inside me. The Spirit was leading me, whispering courage, pointing toward purpose. Soon after, I met Mr. Herod, a retired solicitor with eyes that had seen the darkness of this world. "Son," he said quietly, "you have the look of someone carrying a purpose that scares him." "I don't even know what my purpose is," I admitted. "The Spirit does. He is not hiding it from you. He is leading you into justice." Under his guidance, I began to understand the work I was being called to do. Not for glory, not for wealth, not for recognition, but for the broken, the lost, the voiceless. My first case came quickly. Mariah, accused falsely of theft. Her fear was palpable. I prayed quietly, asking the Spirit to guide me, and the truth slowly unfolded. It was buried beneath lies and fear, but it emerged, as truth always does. She was innocent. Justice prevailed, and I understood, in a way I had never before, that God's hand was at work. Enemies noticed. Threats emerged. Fear stalked me in alleys and courtrooms. And yet, the Spirit reminded me, courage is moving forward with God at your side. One night, 3 men blocked my path. Fear surged, but the Spirit whispered, "Stand your ground." They left, unnerved, and I realized strength was never mine alone. Cases multiplied, stakes grew, each one a thread in a tapestry only God could see in full. When the trial came, the courtroom was packed. Lies fell away, truth stood firm, and the Spirit reminded me that the greatest victory often follows the quietest acts. Mercy offered, forgiveness given, reconciliation allowed. By the end, I was no longer Alexander Montgomery III, heir to a ruined empire. I was Alexander, the Spirit-led solicitor, rebuilt from the inside out, a man of purpose, identity, and calling. Havenford knew me not for wealth, but for justice, courage, and the quiet power of God moving through a willing heart. The days after Mariah's case were quiet, but not peaceful. Quiet has a way of tricking you. It makes you think the storm is over when, in reality, it's only gathering on the horizon. I found myself wandering the streets more often, noticing things I had ignored before. The struggle, the injustice, the subtle cruelty. It was everywhere, wrapped up in normal life. And I began to understand something fundamental. Justice is not something that arrives with applause. It is something that moves quietly through those who are willing to stand, even when no one is watching. Mr. Herod's words kept echoing in my mind. The Spirit leads you. Follow the whisper and do what others will not. I did not always understand and I did not always obey, but each day I felt the pull stronger. One afternoon, a case came that shook me deeper than any courtroom ever could. A man, beaten and broken, had been accused of a crime he did not commit. The evidence stacked against him like stones, every detail fabricated to ensure conviction. I looked at his eyes, haunted, hollow, begging silently, and I knew I could not walk away. The Spirit guided me, nudging at the edges of my thoughts, filling me with a confidence that felt foreign and yet wholly familiar. I spent nights poring over papers, following leads, and uncovering truths others had ignored. Every step was painstaking, exhausting, and yet I could feel God moving with me, whispering, correcting, guiding. I began to see that this work was not just about freeing people from false accusations. It was about revealing the light of God in places of darkness, about stepping into rooms where hope had been smothered and letting His justice flow. But justice comes with resistance. I started noticing strange faces in my neighborhood, watching me, following me. Threats whispered through the alleys, subtle warnings that tried to intimidate me. I felt fear for the first time since the fall. Not the kind that freezes you, but the kind that tests your courage, your faith. One night, walking home through the dimly lit streets, I felt it. 3 men blocking the narrow alley ahead. My chest tightened, my pulse raced. My mind screamed to run, but the Spirit whispered, calm and steady. Stand your ground. I did. They hesitated. The tension stretched like steel. And then, as if something unseen pressed against them, they backed off, muttering threats into the night. My legs trembled, my hands shook. But I realized in that moment that fear could not bind me when God stood beside me. Weeks passed, and the cases piled up. Each one carried a different story of injustice, pain, and despair. A teenager falsely accused of theft. A woman threatened by a powerful employer. A man framed to protect someone higher up. Each case tested me, but each case also stretched my faith and sharpened my understanding of what it meant to be a vessel for God's justice. Through it all, Eli's face returned to me often, the boy whose hunger first reminded me what true wealth was. I visited him when I could, teaching him small lessons, offering protection, and most importantly, showing him God's love through action. I realized that justice is not just about law. It is about heart, about mercy, about lifting the broken even when no one else notices. One evening, I sat in my tiny apartment, papers scattered, my back aching from exhaustion. The city lights shimmered outside my window, but they could not reach the shadows inside me. And yet I felt the Spirit brush against my heart, whispering again, "You are being prepared. Do not fear the opposition. Every trial is shaping you." I closed my eyes and prayed. Not a rehearsed prayer, not the kind I had said as a child, but a real one. a confession of dependence. Lord, I do not know what I am doing. I do not know if I am enough, but I am here. I am listening. Guide me. The next morning brought news of a high-profile case, a woman accused of embezzlement in a corporate office where corruption ran deep. The moment I stepped into the building, I could feel the weight of judgment, of suspicion. Lawyers sneered, assistants whispered, and I felt small, inexperienced, and exposed. But the Spirit whispered again, I am with you. I followed the whisper. I questioned witnesses patiently, uncovered discrepancies, and slowly began to untangle the lies woven into the story. The process was grueling, each hour a test of patience, courage, and faith, but God's presence never left me. Every insight, every revelation, every breakthrough came not from my mind alone, but from the Spirit guiding me. As the days progressed, I realized something I could never have learned in my father's world of wealth and power. Real strength is not in money, status, or fear. Real strength is in standing for what is right even when it is unpopular, dangerous, or exhausting. Real power is in being willing to be a vessel for God's justice, letting Him work through you when you have nothing else to offer. By the time the verdict came, the truth was undeniable. The woman walked free, vindicated, but more than that, she was restored. And I, worn but steady, understood that this work would never end, that there would always be injustice, but also that the Spirit would always guide me, whispering, correcting, leading. I returned home to the dim glow of my small apartment. The peeling walls seemed less oppressive, the night less lonely. I realized in the smallest moments, the quiet victories, the whispered prayers, the people I could protect, God's work was being done. And in that realization, I found peace. Not a fleeting peace, but the kind that lingers, that strengthens, that reassures. The Spirit, the true solicitor, had taken me by the hand, leading me through the shadows towards a destiny far greater than I had imagined. The next weeks were heavy. Not in a dramatic way, no explosions, no sudden shouts, but in a quiet, unrelenting pressure that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Every case brought more than papers and testimonies. It brought shadows. People who thrived in darkness, who wanted to keep the powerless silent. I felt it in the streets, in alleys, in the courthouse hallways where whispers followed me like a second shadow. I woke each morning, eyes burning, heart heavy, and wondered if I was enough. And yet, the Spirit reminded me in subtle ways that I was not alone. Every small act of courage, every moment I listened instead of judging, every prayer whispered under my breath strengthened me, tested me. Their stance challenged me. And then, as if something unseen pressed against them, they faltered and turned, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their presence. My knees shook, but my heart steadied. I was learning something fundamental. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward while fear grips you, letting God guide every step. That night, I sat in my apartment with Eli's face in my mind. The boy had grown quiet recently, shadowed by his own struggles. I realized that God's work was not only in the Spirit breathe over my heart. You will not be alone. I am with you. I stepped into the courtroom the next day with steady resolve. Each witness questioned, each contradiction noted, each lie exposed, was guided not by my understanding, but by a quiet whisper that directed my words, my actions, my attention. By the end, the woman's innocence was undeniable. She left the courthouse weeping, clutching my hand with. It was during this time that I began to keep a journal, not for the world to see, not for any reason, but to pour out my thoughts, my fears, my prayers. Each entry was raw, confessional, a slow unwrapping of the man I was and the man God was molding me to become. I wrote about Eli, about Mariah, and about the unseen battles fought in courtrooms and hearts alike. I wrote about my failures, my moments of doubt, and my whispers of faith. One evening, the quiet was broken by a knock on my door. A young woman, tears streaking her face, handed me a crumpled letter. Her brother had been wrongfully arrested, convicted of a crime he did not commit. Her eyes, wide and desperate, searched mine. "Please," she whispered, "I don't know where else to go." I felt the spirit stir within me, a calm certainty that this case, like all the others, was not mine alone. I gathered every bit of courage, every ounce of patience, and began the work. The city felt colder that week. Not the chill of winter, but a chill that creeps into your chest, settling deep where fear and doubt whisper. I could feel eyes on me everywhere, some curious, some hostile, some downright malicious. Every corner, every alley, every courthouse hallway seemed to hold a shadow, waiting for me to slip. I was learning that justice carries a price, and not always money or recognition. Sometimes it demands your peace, your sleep, your sense of safety. I began to wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, replaying every conversation, every document, every witness I had spoken to. I asked myself repeatedly, am I enough? Can I carry this? Will the Spirit truly guide me through this darkness? I remembered that first night on the riverbank when I had whispered, Lord, what am I supposed to do now? Back then, I had only been asking for guidance. Now, I was asking for courage, for strength, for discernment. And he answered, not with thunder, but with a gentle stillness that settled my soul even as the storm raged outside my mind. It was during this week that the most dangerous case yet arrived. A woman, powerful and respected, accused of manipulating finances, framed by the very people who profited from her silence. The evidence was stacked high against her, and the courtroom would be filled with people eager to see her fall. I felt the weight pressing down on my shoulders before I even opened the files. The Spirit nudged me again. Do not rely on your own understanding. Follow me and speak truth, even when the world shouts against it. I spent days preparing. Every detail, every contradiction, every possible question mapped out. I prayed more in those days than I had in months. Not the polite, rehearsed prayers I used to whisper at parties or in church as a boy, but raw, honest prayers. Confessions of my fear, my doubt, my weariness. Lord, I am afraid, but I am here. Guide me, lead me, speak through me. Then came the night before the trial. I could hardly sleep. My apartment felt smaller than usual, the shadows stretching long and heavy. Eli's face drifted into my thoughts, and I realized this work was not just for the accused, not just for the court, but for the unseen, for the forgotten, for those who needed a hand to guide them when the world had turned its back. The morning of the trial arrived like a storm breaking, courtrooms filled with tension, reporters whispering, lawyers exchanging subtle glances that spoke volumes. And I, nervous yet steady, stepped inside knowing I was not alone. The Spirit was there, nudging, guiding, whispering at every turn. The trial moved slowly, deliberately, each moment a test. Witnesses were intimidated, evidence seemed overwhelming, lies thickened the air like smoke. I could feel the shadows pressing closer, trying to suffocate the truth. But each time I faltered, a whisper in my soul reminded me, truth does not fear exposure. Stand firm. Hours passed. I questioned witnesses carefully, persistently. I traced lies, untangled them thread by thread. I prayed silently between exchanges, asking for clarity, courage, and wisdom. And slowly, painstakingly, the truth began to emerge. The woman's innocence became undeniable. Lies unraveled, manipulations exposed. When the verdict came, relief flooded me, but not the kind you feel after winning a game or achieving a goal. This relief was deeper, more profound. It was the satisfaction of knowing God had worked through me, using my hands, my mind, and my heart to bring justice where it was due. After the trial, the woman approached me quietly, tears brimming. She whispered, "Thank you. You believed in me when no one else would." I could feel the spirit settle warmly in my chest. It was not about recognition. It was never about recognition. It was about being a vessel, a tool for God's justice and mercy. That night, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but alive in a way I had never been before. The walls no longer seemed oppressive. The peeling paint felt like character rather than decay. I realized that the Spirit had been working all along, shaping me, guiding me, preparing me for battles I could not yet see. Even in victory, I knew the shadows were not gone. The men who had watched me, who had whispered threats, who had tried to intimidate, were still out there. And I knew that the next trials, the next confrontations would be harder. But I was no longer the Alexander who had once existed only in a world of gold and pretense. I was Alexander reborn in purpose, sharpened in faith, guided by the Spirit. I had learned that the true battle is never against people alone, but against the darkness in the world and in ourselves. And I realized something more. Fear will always be present. Shadows will always lurk. But when the Spirit leads, courage does not depend on the absence of fear. Courage grows out of faith, out of trust, out of obedience. The city felt heavier now, almost suffocating. The air was thick with whispers, half-heard threats, and eyes that lingered too long. Every step I took seemed measured, every glance over my shoulder calculated. It was not paranoia. I had learned that much, but a new awareness. The shadows were real, and they were persistent. Eli noticed it before I did. The boy, perceptive beyond his years, looked up at me one afternoon, worry etched into his small face. "Mr. Alexander," he said quietly, "I think they're watching you again." I wanted to dismiss it, to reassure him, but the weight in my chest told me he was right. Shadows moved in corners, men lingering where they had no business. Threats, subtle and heavy, had become routine. Fear pressed in. But now I knew what the Spirit had been trying to teach me. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means walking forward with God, even when the path is dark. The next case brought that lesson into sharp focus. A man accused of fraud had been beaten by the system, trapped in a web of lies so dense it seemed impossible to untangle. Evidence had been destroyed, witnesses silenced, the judge openly skeptical. And yet the Spirit stirred in me, whispering direction, offering insight I could not have discovered alone. I began the work knowing the stakes were higher than ever. Each document examined felt like peeling back layers of shadow. Every witness questioned was a test of patience and discernment. I prayed constantly, not for glory or recognition, but for clarity, for courage, for the ability to see truth where others could not. One night, exhausted and drained, I walked the streets alone. The city was quiet, eerily so, and shadows stretched long across brick walls. I felt a presence behind me, deliberate and pressing. My pulse quickened. The spirit whispered, "Stand firm." Every soul I could guide toward God's justice and mercy. To be continued. If Alexander's journey pulled at you even a little, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps more people find stories that remind them God is still speaking and still reaching for us. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because this story is only beginning to heat up. Share it with someone who needs a nudge of hope today. And tell me in the comments which moment in Alexander's struggle sat with you the longest. Stay expectant, stay grounded. God is not done with him, and he is definitely not done with you.